picture now, you can see it, right? But like, sort of
Special.
without, no, it's just the longer exposure, you get some, it didn't last very long. It started turning, that's what it looked like when we were really looking at it. Almost, I mean, we didn't even really get the purple. But I mean, it's definitely brighter. It was brighter than that, but it was really interesting. That's what I'm wondering too. How many of those people actually saw it with their eyes?
Two friends we have, Montana.
Well, they were further north, right?
And I was like, that is amazing. That's artist paint. Now I got a question.
Yeah. Well, on Friday night it was really strong, and some, especially people further north, and I really have seen it. My cousin's in Virginia, though. She was posting pictures. I said, "Really? Did you really see it? Watching?" Oh, was that? Wow.
This is Trustee Gahuli down there.
I'll see it with my actual eyes.
Is that her in the audience? Is that she? Oh, no. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's a trash. Go get a forecast.
Okay, we are live. We're ready to get going.
Interesting stuff.
Okay, good evening. There being 7:27 PM on Monday, May 13th, 2024. I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, can we have a roll call for the committee, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Niramatsu?
Here.
Trustee Gahuli?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you. We have 3 items up for business today. The first is a discussion of Case 2408, a request for variance from Section 62-215 Stationary District zoning requiring retail service uses on the ground floor in SA1 for 8911 Burlington. This is a planning and zoning recommendation that comes before us. As usual, we have a very detailed memo and information from the Planning and Zoning Commission, but I am going to ask our village planner, Kate Portillo, to provide a summary to the board and the audience as to what we're looking for here.
Thank you so much, President Garvey and trustees. So this case was heard in April by the Planning and Zoning Commission. For a little bit of background information, the property owner, Tartan Investments LLC, has owned this parcel since 2017. In 2018, a map amendment was approved to change the zoning from SA5 to SA1. What they are proposing is a 3-story, 6-unit residential building, and the station area district zoning for the I'm so sorry, that is my typo. For the SA1 district allows multifamily housing, but for the primary frontage, the storefront building type requires only commercial retail. So this site, you may be familiar with it, is right there on Burlington Avenue, west of Prairie Avenue. It is between the strip mall that includes Phil's and a residential building. The lot is plus or minus 5,229 square feet, which is arguably small considering that our zoning lot for a residential district minimum size is 6,200 square feet. As you can see from the zoning map, the location is in what I would call a transition area between commercial and residential uses. Quite a mosaic of zoning, to be honest. And so when this case was heard before the Planning and Zoning Commission, the request that is before you is to essentially allow a building that conforms with the storefront type building, but without the ground floor retail. So the petitioner's architect, the full drawings were not submitted with the application. I had the opportunity to review some previously drawn concept drawings before we went to the 2021 codes. And the main objective, this will be a building with the parking in the rear. The 2 ground floor units will have entries from Burlington Avenue. The remaining 2nd and 3rd floor units would have, the main entrance would be on the side, on the east side of the building. and parking in the rear. I believe I said that already. So the relief being requested truly is to construct a building that falls within the setback requirements and such things for the SA1 district, but does not contain that commercial component. The Planning and Zoning Commission did hear this case and found that the standards were met, and they, at the April 25th meeting, issued a unanimous favorable decision recommending approval of the variance for 100% residential use at this property. It was a vote of 4-0. And the applicant is here this evening along with their architect, so I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I may defer to them for any that would be best suited for them to respond to.
Thank you, Kate. At this time, does any board members have questions of Kate or staff?
Just one question for me. Can you remind me what the setback requirement is here?
So, I meant to bring my stationary district zoning, but I believe that the front yard setback is a range between 5 to 10 feet. So in all the stationary districts, we tend to have these ranges, and we also have what's called a build-to zone. So in SA1, generally, it's a sort of downtown type appearance where you have more of a street wall of stores, like you might see along Grand Boulevard.
Okay, thank you.
Could we talk about the side setbacks?
Sure, yes. So one question that the architect for the applicant addressed in our Planning and Zoning Commission is that the question was raised, why not a request for a map amendment back to the previous zoning? And the setbacks are different for that, and the feasibility of the project would be at stake, is what was stated, if they were trying to develop the site for residential with the setbacks of the SA5 district. So for this particular zoning, and using the storefront building type, the setbacks at the side yard are 5 feet for a side of the building that is a different building type, and as little as 0 setback for the side of the property that is next to a similar building type, which would be the building to the west. And because architectural plans were not a part of this submittal, I will defer to the applicant to confirm what the actual setbacks would be.
So that means if this were approved, because it's not, if it were required to stay a storefront building, since it's a different use, a different building type than the building to the west, which is strictly residential, it would be a storefront building adjacent to residential, which is currently what's required. They would need at least a 5-foot setback on the side, correct? Because different building types.
They're asking for relief from their requirement to have commercial, so we would evaluate it as a residential building.
So that means, since it's the same building type, in now as an SA1, they could have a 0 lot line adjacent to that residential building to the west.
Yes, in theory, that's correct.
So my concern in not having a site plan on this is we don't, and maybe we need to ask the petitioner, but we don't know. And if you go, Stevie, could you go back to the picture of
That's
the
me,
property?
actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kate. One more. The other, that one. So the residential building to the west there has just a couple foot carriage walk, which you can see adjacent to that building, and windows all along that side. I'm concerned that if we approve this, instead of having that maybe 8 feet of space between those two buildings that would be required if it was still a storefront building, that they would by right be allowed to have a 0
zero lot line building and then only 3 feet there between these two buildings. If it went back to an S85, I think that they would also still have to have 8 feet. So that, I have concerns about this, and because we didn't have a site plan in our packet, it's not required, which we might want to change, but because we didn't have a site plan in our packet, the Plan Commission also didn't have that information. But I do have concerns about that for the neighbors.
And I appreciate you bringing it up, Trustee Anderson. I'm going to ask the village, I mean, we could ask the applicant to come forward and see if there's a response they could give to that, to address the concerns, but I don't know if that would be binding or, I don't want to put the applicant on the spot. Would the applicant like to come forward and address that? If we could just have you please come up and state, whoever's going to be speaking, state your name for the record, please.
Good evening, trustees. My name is Scott McNaughton. I have my brother Ryan McNaughton and our architect Chuck Grund.
Were you able to hear Trustee Hendrick's concerns?
Yeah, I'll turn this over to Chuck.
Hello, everyone. It's fun to be on this side for a change. I can address those concerns. We're in the SA1 district, and frankly, this request was just simply a zoning change to allow for a full residential building. We've met the setback requirements of the SA1 district on the west side and on the east side. In reality, the west property line of the building west of ours, I think it's more like 5 feet. There's a sidewalk on the side of that building, and we are 1 foot from the property line to the west. So basically, we've met the requirements of the code. I understand that there could be a concern about light and a blockage of light. I don't see that as an issue. The building to the west is front-loaded and back-loaded, and our building is front-loaded and back-loaded. So, but again, in summary, we've met the requirements of the code in terms of the setbacks.
What does front-loaded and back-loaded?
It just means that the bedrooms and living rooms are either, in our building, are to the north or to the south.
Okay, thanks.
So,
But you only meet the requirements of the code if we approve this variance. You only meet those setbacks if this variance is approved, correct?
no, we're in the SA1 district now, and we've met the requirements of the setbacks. Because the building to the west is residential, so the setback requirement there is minimal, 0 to 1. I think Kate said I don't have that with me. To the east, it's 5 feet because there's a non-residential building, and we've met that requirement as well.
But
And
if-
that's why our entry is on
Sure.
the east side.
But if it were a storefront building, because it's two separate uses, two different kinds of buildings, the setback is more than 1 foot.
But the code doesn't define it that way. The code says if it's an SA1 district, this is the requirement to the west, and this is the requirement to the east, depending on the adjacent building to either side.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Just to further clarify, in SA1, it's only a storefront or civic building that are allowed to be built. So the setbacks wouldn't change, even if they had commercial in there. And in fact, by right, it could go up to 6 feet. I'm sorry, 6 stories.
I'm sorry, you said the setback wouldn't change if it was commercial?
They would not be obligated to do so. The setbacks would remain the same.
Other questions or comments from the board?
No, thank you.
Okay, all right. We'll put this up in 2 weeks for a board vote. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, the next item is a discussion of case 2407, which is request for a variance from section 62-75 bulk yard and space requirements for 30H25 Raymond Avenue. Similar situation, Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation. I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you, President Garvey and Commissioners. This case for 3825 Raymond Avenue involves a property where the property owner, Patrick Cunningham, has resided since 1997. It is in the A single-family residential district. This lot is 4,384 square feet, and therefore the parcel is considered substandard according to our code. A garage size for that type of property is allowed to be a maximum of 440 square feet, and there is a garage on the property right now, and so the existing coverage is 37%. The applicant has provided images of their garage. It was hit by a tree a while back, so there are some consequences of that occurring in terms of its condition. The slab is also in a state of disrepair that is not favorable to patching. And so when this applicant submitted a building permit application, the actual conditions of the site and its building coverage limits being reached came to light. So in this district, the building coverage, which as a reminder is your primary structure and your accessory structure, your garage, is allowed to be 30% maximum. And so essentially this request from the petitioner is to rebuild their existing garage, but they have requested a variance to do so, to authorize this lot to hold both a home and a garage. And so the proposed 440 square foot garage will actually bring the building coverage down just slightly to 36.4%. And the amount of green space remains, that requirement is met. So they are not encroaching on their green space requirement. And the Planning and Zoning Commission heard this case, felt that it did meet the standards for a variation, and they issued a unanimous favorable recommendation in approval of the variance. They did make the condition or send this to you with a condition that the downspouts be directed to the private property yard. That is slightly different than our code that says 50-50. So that is a matter you may wish to give consideration to. This was a 4-0 vote in favor, and the property owner is here as well if you have any questions.
Thank you, Kate. Do any board members have any questions of Kate or staff at this point?
Is that a paved alley, Kate?
No, it is not a paved alley.
Any other questions or comments from the board for staff or just in general on the project? Okay, we'll give everyone a chance to review it further. We'll put it up at the meeting of it's now the 28th, I believe, is the meeting, the May 28th meeting. Okay, thank you very much, Kate, for the presentation. Thank you to Planning and Zoning Commission. The last item we have up for discussion is a recommendation to adopt revisions to the village's Chapter 58 Vegetation Code to meet the Tree Inventory Grant Requirements Program. We have a very detailed memo from Vincent Smith, our Public Works Director, but I would ask Vince to just kind of summarize what the basis of this recommendation is to comply with the grants that we received.
Yeah, absolutely. So the village applied for a $18,500 tree inventory grant through the Morton Arboretum on October 7th, 2022, and we were awarded that grant on January 6th, 2023. As part of the grant requirement, the village was required to adopt language that will promote and protect public health, safety, and general welfare by providing, by providing the regulation of planting, maintenance, and removal of trees, shrubs, and other plants within the village, and identifying that village trees are critical village infrastructure that promote environmental benefits to the community. Village staff work with the Morton Arboretum to include the required and recommended language changes within the code, the vegetation code. We wanted to give you an opportunity to review the revisions that we made prior to us adopting this and bring it to a board meeting.
Thank you, Vince. Questions or comments from the board?
I am very pleased to see this. I work with a lot of tree ordinances on a daily basis, and these are best management practices. The fact that we're working with Morton Arboretum on this means that they're backed up by research and practical experience. This is good stuff. I do have a couple of minor comments that maybe I'll
Yep.
talk with you about. I won't get into every little thing, but there are a couple spots where it's unclear if we're talking about trees on the public spaces versus trees on private property. Section 5847 is one in particular. It appears to prohibit individuals from caring for their own trees, pruning, et cetera, if they're not licensed as a contractor with the village. I don't think that that's our intent. Maybe we can just clear up some of that language, make sure it's very clear whether we're talking about public spaces or private spaces and what we're trying to accomplish there. One thing is, this prohibits us from planting two of the same trees next to one another. The common thing that you see in other communities is maybe making a minimum or a maximum trees adjacent would be 5 rather than 1.
Okay.
Then you have a little more flexibility. Let's see. I'd also suggest, this calls out, we don't want trees planted within 10 feet of water or sewer lines. In practice, I think that's from our original code. In practice, that's a little restrictive. You can plant trees over water and sewer lines, especially in the parkway when you don't have a lot of space to work with there. That's where the lines are. And most trees don't go straight down, which is the depth of the water and sewer lines, especially mains, shouldn't be a problem. So having that language be that specific is restrictive. Like I said, I've seen it say 10 feet from hydrants, just so that you can have that clearance, but 10 feet from the lines is maybe too much. I'd like to see an added prohibition from trees considered invasive. I think that's 5871. For 5876, we talk about protection of trees. We should be sure that our infrastructure projects, like streets work, are compliant with this code, both in construction documents and in practice. I think when I've driven around and seen some of our tree protections, it doesn't quite match up with what we've got here all the time. And then one last thing I'd maybe like to touch on is the 50/50 replacement program. That section is a little unclear, I think, because it says, I think it implies that the village will, whenever we want to replace trees or put in trees, that we will go to those residents on those adjacent properties and expect them to put in for the 50/50 replacement program, rather than just only doing it when the residents request. The problem with that is that underserved or lower income areas end up, we see now, that we historically having less tree canopy and less tree cover, and then having health and other problems associated with just not having trees in their area. And I don't think that we want our streets we don't want to be able to drive down our streets and have signals that, oh my gosh, this is a lower income area because they don't have street trees and they couldn't afford them. That's not what we want, a signal that we want to be showing. We want to fill in the tree canopy wherever we can, where it's empty throughout the city. So expecting 50/50 replacement program on every parkway tree, I think, is excessive.
No, I understand. And what we do when we don't meet the threshold of people that are committing to the 50/50 program, we identify spaces with the access budget and we plant there. So to your point, though, I understand what you're saying, and we will make sure to remove that language.
Right, and that would be more in line with the sustainability plan as well.
Sure would. Thank you. That was going to be my comment also. Thank you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something, I mean, that particular item, I mean, the direction we can give in that is actually a budgetary item. We created the 50/50 program to try and stretch the tree planting budget, but if the board wanted to make a decision during the course of the upcoming, or, next year's budget, that we want to invest the amount of money we're putting to tree planting differently, we're not contingent upon 50/50 or clarifying that language or system for doing it. I mean, as Vincent explained, when we don't meet the requirements or we don't have the 50/50 program, we try and plug it in, but maybe the board should be more involved in coming up with the language or programming or making a distinction to avoid having certain areas not get trees, that maybe we need to talk about how the 50/50 program exists or is changed going forward. But-
Yes.
I think that's what the tree inventory is helping
Yes.
us identify too. So I think the Conservation Commission's excited to see that inventory when it's complete and have some recommendations for the budget along with this.
Yes, so that's part of the inventory is their inventory in assessing all the trees, but they're also identifying future planting spaces. And that's what we'll work off of with the excess funding in terms of putting trees in.
So, that's maybe a topic that can come up further during the budget. But, I mean, I was trying to follow along with and obviously Trustee Hendricks is very experienced in this field. Were there any, because we need to adopt this, going back to her first point about having no more than, 2 trees in a row being the same, she indicated that might be a little excessive. Is that a requirement? Or how did we come up with that number? I mean, and I don't want to put you in this, but I know you've been involved in this, but, Vic's not here. But you think that's a concern, or can that be changed?
Yes, so some of this is a recommendation. The content that's in red text, that is the requirement. The blue is the recommendation. So we can alter some of that language to meet those requirements if that's a recommended portion.
Well, that's why, I mean, obviously Trustee Hendricks is very experienced in this. I just want to get their feedback from the rest of the board.
If you want background on why that's probably in the code, it's probably because however many years ago now, we had Dutch elm disease.
Right.
It wiped out all the American elms all down our main streets because we had every tree planted the same, and disease moves rampantly through that. But you can do this in different ways, like saying no block should have more than 15% of the same species, or different, you can do it in different ways, but still be able to get several trees that are near each other and can have a little more impact that might be the same species because you've got the same fall color going at the same time. You have a little more flexibility with what we're doing with where we're putting our trees.
Right.
And I think your point was, I kind of understood why you made the point. I'm just trying to come up with language that we could build a consensus on, because we do need to adopt this to comply with the grant. So instead, I don't want to just necessarily put it in staff's lap. You said that one's probably too restrictive, it's 5 in other places, but the percentage that you talked about, is there some thought that we could build a consensus on that, or, do you have a specific recommendation?
I'd have to go back and review other codes to see what's most common.
Was it specific language that Arboretum is requiring around that, or do we have the flexibility to adjust that?
We have some flexibility, and I can work with you prior to the next board meeting on
Sure.
language updates.
Does anyone have concerns about that?
No, just if it
No.
doesn't meet the grant requirement, that's my only.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we'll make
no,
sure that-
I'm in agreement with you.
I mean, kind of, you refer, like you said, maybe the best practices, best updated practices, what is most common for municipalities like us to, because, I mean, I think you stated the issue very well, and, it does seem overly restrictive. And, the other, I mean, again, I was trying to move along with the points that
Sorry,
you.
I was moving fast.
No, that's okay, but I mean, can we go through them just to see, it was starting from the top again? Because I think the first one you brought up was the limit on 1 tree, or,
Sure. Well, I was pointing out that there are a couple places where it's not clear if we're talking about private or public property. And I think the first one was, do we want to say that anybody pruning a tree on their own property needs to have a license with the village as a contractor?
and that was section, you referred to a section where I was trying to, what section?
It is
5847.
Yeah.
5847, so,
I think that's intended to be on public property,
Right.
or perhaps for a tree removal, but when it's pruning or spraying a fruit tree on your own property, that seems excessive.
I agree.
so contractor, the section that says contractor license
Yep.
required for work on private trees.
I trimmed my tree this weekend.
Yeah, I'd
You'd
be in big trouble.
violation.
Yeah, I think that's going to.
No, I do believe that this language was intended for private trees, and it was to try and
Oh,
create.
for
best-
private.
Yes, I think it was intended to create best practice on public and private throughout the urban canopy, through the arboretum.
Okay, well, so there are different levels of, I'm familiar with the Arboretum's program here, and there are different levels of code updates. We're not aiming for the code update that really digs into private trees, because that's a whole different ballgame. It becomes very, very difficult to enforce that, for one thing. I'm not sure that's,
So the language in 5847, the existing language is the language in black that is actually the restriction that no person shall engage in the business of trimming, et cetera, from private property without first obtained a license. The red language is the suggested language from the Morton Arboretum, but your concern is with the initial, which is the existing language we have, is that correct?
yes. We could leave it as removing trees does need, removing trees on private property requires that license, but that also becomes tricky because there's a size challenge. I mean,
What if it's a
Trustee
5
Ketchmark probably
No,
has some thoughts on this as well.
I think we're off base doing that on private property.
Okay.
And, I mean, Adam, is there any link to, I don't see any link to state statute or anything like that, any requirement that that's there, or what the base, authority for that is?
No, I'm not sure what the authority is. I do know it's from a 1981 ordinance, so I have to say I've never come across this one for any of our adjudication citations or anything, so I'm not familiar with this or how much it's been enforced, but I could help staff look into it to see if there's certain kind of, like you said, removal of trees require a licensed contractor. I'm vaguely familiar with spraying. There's different levels of spraying that I believe people need to be certified in order to do certain kinds of spraying. I'm only aware of that from Public Works collective bargaining agreement matters. But I will work with staff to make sure that's reflective of what our current practice is.
Okay, but I think the consensus I'm getting from the board in 5847 that we want to do the least restrictive action on trees on private property. I mean, it's not that we don't care, it's just the ability to, monitor, enforce, and the reason for it. And again, just thinking back to when this was adopted, it probably had a relation to some diseased tree situation where people maybe were trying to take care of trees on their own property, and maybe it was a need that needed to be addressed at that time, but,
Well, we do have a separate section of this code that addresses diseased trees.
okay. So, Vince, the time frame on this to comply with the grant, do we need this adopted at the next meeting?
It needs to be adopted prior to July.
Okay. Well, let's try and, if we can get these, situations straightened out, change, let's put it back up on the meeting of the 28th, if not, the first meeting in June. But again, if I could call on you, Trustee Hendricks, to go down the other ones just to see if there's any other issues where we need to build consensus or direction from the board.
Yes, so, sure. So we talked about the species being planted adjacently. I'd like to add to 5871 a prohibition from trees considered invasive. We talk about other problems and that
Is
we don't
there a
wanna be
standard
planting
definition of invasive or in our ordinance, or is it a industry standard?
that's a good, I don't know that we've got one in our ordinance, but there are standard,
Sure, the Morton Arboretum would know probably as well as any if
Yes.
there's something defining invasive. If you could, get in the next 2 weeks as we're working on this, if you could maybe come back with the, the board agree, it seems to be, if we can regulate invasive trees being planted, that's something the board would like to do, I assume?
Yes.
Or I shouldn't assume, but,
Is that the part where it says a copy of the undesirable species list is available at Village Hall? Is that a separate portion?
that's part of it, yeah. but I don't have
What number is that?
Where are you reading that,
I'm
Trustee
reading
Kuzma?
that at 5871, but I think maybe.
5871, yeah. So it talks about only desirable trees of good appearance, beauty, adaptability, and generally free from injurious insects or disease shall be planted in public sites. I'd like to add, I think, that sentence, something about we also don't want invasives.
But the language in paragraph A above it, where tree species, it's recommended
Or
by the,
undesirable.
that tree species shall be selected from the Northern Illinois tree species list from the Morton Arboretum. Do you think that red language, that's the red language is suggested by the, do you think that maybe that list would exclude, that list would exclude invasives, so the necessity?
Hopefully.
Okay, if we can, because that might, as Trustee Kuzny pointed out, that might be the fix, that if the Northern Illinois species list from the Morton Arboretum excludes invasive trees, then we don't need to add the language or anyone else, because it's saying we could only select trees from that list. So
Yes, and that's
maybe
That's a good point.
what it's intended for.
okay.
Thank you. I think I mentioned making sure that our own infrastructure projects are in compliance.
And is that something, are the existing
sure that
standards we have state-of-the-art, or do we just need to enforce them better?
I think we just need to enforce them better.
Okay.
And make sure that it's going into our construction documents and site visits.
Okay.
A lot of times contractors, if they can get away with not having to put a giant tree fence out to the drip line, they won't do it.
Well,
So we may have to just make sure that we're enforcing that. and
So that's
pushing
more of
it.
an enforcement issue, and I see Derek nodding his head and Vince nodding his head.
Yeah, and just for clarification purposes, in terms of the 10-foot separation for planting, Vic had a concern with projects being planned, new water main being installed under the right-of-way in the sidewalk, and he felt that there was some devastation taking place in the tree canopy. So this would be moving forward for future improvements, so I'll clarify that in the language.
Okay, so new water mains or the service lines?
New water mains that are being installed under the sidewalk for improvements are within that 10 feet limit of, and it's devastating the canopy, he felt that.
So would that
there is
mean that we would
significant
end up taking the new water mains out from
No.
under the sidewalk so that we could still have trees in the parkway? Or
He
would
pre-
it
He would
prevent
prefer
us from?
to have the installation of the water main in the roadways,
Okay, so
and that was a recommendation as he talked with the Arboretum.
that may be a better way to put it, to clarify, that we're trying to cite
Yep.
the water main, not limit limit where we're putting the trees.
New plantings, yeah.
But can I get Derek to weigh in on that, because that,
I've sent you an email already. We should be involved with that because,
Yeah.
here's the issue we have. So we have combined sewers.
why don't you come up to the microphone, Derek, just if you could, please?
Difficulty we have with new water mains are we have our combined sewers in the center of the street. We need to typically keep 10 foot of separation horizontally from those sewers with our water main. Puts them right about under the curb, which is just a really bad location. So, and this is what when we made the move years ago and went to the sidewalk, so now we're looking at, do we put in the parkway between the back of the curb and this tree? Yikes, that's like less than 5 feet from the tree.
Right.
So we put them over in the sidewalk, and I'm aware there's been some trees that have died off on there, and I've actually, what we talked about is having Vic put some, I'd like to have some data, because is it 5% of the trees, and maybe it's not as big a problem? Is it 50% of the trees, in which I don't think it's that large, but it's a pretty complex issue to talk generally. We could certainly have goals, but that's what we've faced when we try to select a corridor for our water main
Sure,
replacement.
and that's a problem everywhere.
Yeah.
My problem with the way that this ordinance written, the way that this is written, though, if we have trees under the sidewalk, that means because we don't have enough space, we will not be able to put trees in the parkway. Because of this 10-foot restriction in
But it was your suggestion to consider lessening the restriction on how close a tree could be planted to a water main or the sidewalk?
Yep.
I mean, but does that, and again, you would know, but does that tree survive if did you suggest a distance? Is it 5 feet or, 7 feet?
I didn't suggest a distance. I regularly design them on top of water mains.
Okay.
Because-
But if our water mains are going to be, if the plan we have going forward is to have the water mains under the sidewalk, we're not going to be putting a tree right on top of it, so if it
Correct.
does go in the parkway, but are we
It's the
experiencing tree loss based on that, though?
It's the installation, it's not the tree planted on top of the water main, it's the installation of the water main after the tree's there, right? That's causing
Right.
the issue.
Right, that's,
And,
that's what you're talking about,
It's the
correct?
It's the trenching, and just as a refresher, it was back in roughly '08, we got some pretty significant, we were probably short-sighted on what our tree protection was prior to '08, so we now require root cutting on the side that we're doing the excavation, that way you're not peeling the roots up the tree. We do put the tree fence around there. Again, the drip line is, we can talk more in detail, that can be very difficult. Drip line goes almost to the house on some of these, it goes out, so it's typically, if I recall right, it's 10 feet each side of the tree. If we want to expand that down to Parkway, we can. Going 10 feet from the trees gets you all the way to the back of curb, so happy to make any adjustments, I'm just trying to point out.
Do we
what
always
we
have
wanna
to open trench water mains when we're replacing?
Typically, that's the most common. Are you talking about trying to do some directional boring?
Because when you can go straight at the tree trunk and have the water main directly under the tree, you can go under without cutting the tree roots except for a little bit, and that's actually the healthiest for the tree, if we can directionally bore.
Right. It's a long, I don't want to sit here, I'm not here to say no to any of this, that's not my role, but you need a pit every time, and you could do a much longer bore, maybe, but there's some sewer and water services you will want to expose if you're gonna bore pipes, so you don't bore through the sewer and water services. Cost at some point may be a consideration, but all I'm trying to point out, it's pretty complex. We can make
I know.
any changes we want, but it's hard to just talk here in 10 minutes about all the impacts.
And I apologize, I'm just trying to get language that, we can build a consensus on, because I know as soon as the idea came up about the water mains, I'm aware of our historical change to put them under the sidewalks and the reason behind that, and going back to putting them in the street just wouldn't work, so.
It'd be difficult. If I could suggest, I think it's pretty complex. Maybe we have 7 streets of water mains out to bid now. Maybe staff and trustee Hendricks, whoever, can meet together and we can evaluate like the impacts and why, those were selected, and maybe there was one we would have preferred to put somewhere else. But I really think it'll end up being like a site-by-site basis. When we can have some guidelines or goals, that's great,
But if maybe I'm not hearing the issue raised clearly in my mind. If we are going to continue to put new water mains under the sidewalk, is the distance that we're going to restrict planting a tree within 10 feet of that, or is 5 feet something that is a solution, or are we worried if we do it at 5 feet, we're going to lose a lot of trees? I mean, is that the issue?
I would take the distance to the water line restriction out of there completely. I don't think it's necessary. We're doing a lot of water main work now. Hopefully, we won't have to be digging these up again for a long, long time. So when we're putting new trees in, if we're doing water main work and we have to trench, sometimes the tree will be damaged. But saying that we can't have trees with, anything that would restrict us from putting trees in the parkway, I think is problematic.
And I think, so when I'm hearing, we're talking two different things. Maybe it's just me,
Yeah.
but you're talking about how close you can plant a tree to a water main, and I'm saying.
Because that's what that's the code, the section of the code that we're talking
That's
about.
being, okay. Yeah, I have to admit, I didn't prep read that section
Sure.
before the meeting.
But I mean, you talked about, doing, empirical studies to see, okay, if we put we plant trees or have trees within, feet of the sidewalk, and how many we lose, the percentage, is that something we can do going forward, or?
I'd like to historically look at,
Yeah.
I wonder if Victor can have data. We know where we've replaced the water mains in the past, and does he have records of how many trees died? I'm actually here, so I'm from the civil engineering side looking at, are we prohibiting mains under sidewalks? I don't think, once the main's in, planting a tree close to the water main's gonna have issues with the water main, other than maintenance. If it's over the water main, you have to dig up a water main to put a clamp on. We see the difficulties, but I don't think it affects the water main. Might need a little more talk with staff on this.
Okay.
You
well-
said we had to July?
Yeah, we have till July for
I
this.
mean, we can
And
probably get together. and
All right,
just-
again, do you want to maybe compare, other towns, other best practices, and, and I also, you're raising the issues, but I think you're getting a lot of head nods and agreement from trustees. They have similar concerns or whatever. This is one of those things, we should kind of try and resolve it in the best way now. I know this is prolonging the topic right now, but we should probably clear this up going forward. We're making a lot of investments in water mains. We're also making a lot of investment in trees, and trees are important, so this is something, we just got to figure it out. So maybe you can work with staff, and, we could committee it again on the 28th if we need to, bring back more ideas if there's time. Just, we got to get it done. We got to pass it no later than the second meeting in June, right? Because by
Correct.
July 1st, so you want to bring it back on the committee in 2 weeks with more ideas, or if you think you've got a language change that we could build a consensus on. Otherwise, we have June 10th and June 24th meetings, going forward, so,
yes.
okay? The board okay with that
Yes.
procedure?
Yes.
Yes.
I just had one more comment.
No.
More just related to the cleanup of this altogether. I just wanted to thank whoever changed his agent to their, every place in here. That's a great opportunity to clean that up, so thank you. I noticed it in every paragraph.
Great, thank you.
The very next line after the sewer lines statement that trustee Hendricks was talking about, it also says, no tree within 5 feet of the sidewalk. If we're gonna change that,
That's reasonable.
yeah, within 5 feet of the sidewalk,
That's a reasonable restriction.
really? So, but my parkway is within 5 feet, that whole area, that you're not gonna have 5-foot area without touching the sidewalk.
Okay.
So that would be restrictive of the parkways on a lot of our streets, to have trees.
It could potentially be decreased to 3 or 4, but, it could be decreased to 3. But I would want to talk to Vic about that.
But is that the language of planting the tree, not a full-grown tree diameter? How close, is that the distinction that you're talking about? Because what
doesn't
you're
say
saying is
that.
you're,
That's where it's
Does it say
planted.
on private property?
No, I'm just,
Just public, oh.
but I Trustee Cote, what I think it's saying is where you plant the tree. When you plant the tree, it's not going to be a full-size tree. If it grows to within 5 feet of the sidewalk, it
no,
doesn't.
it just doesn't say that, that's all, it just.
Okay, so if you could work on clearing up that language too. I think we kind of all have an idea what we want, and we want to comply with the best practices. So let's appreciate you bringing this forward with the language from the Arboretum. And anything else, Vince, you think we're missing or you need more direction on?
No, I think I have good direction as of right now, and I will reach out to trustee Hendricks and further this dialogue and make sure
Okay.
that we meet all your guys'.
And just work with staff. If you think it's a good idea, we can committee to add it to the committee of the 28th, and then, deal with it in June. Or if you think you really got some solid language, we could just put it back on the board. I'll be in communication with you as we set the agenda, so.
No, absolutely. I think we can make the necessary adjustments by the 28th. for sure.
Okay. All right, thank you, Vince. Appreciate it. Okay, that ends the items we have under regular business. Once again, I'll open it up to public comment. Is there anyone on this side? Anyone on this side? Okay, hearing no public comment. Tim, any executive session tonight? Okay, well, there's no need for executive session, so at 8:15, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting.
So moved.
Second.
The motion to adjourn was made by trustee Gahuli, second by trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchler?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Nearmatu?
Aye.
Trustee Gahuli?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned at 8:15 PM. Thank you.